This is the Ed Schultz Internet Broadcast. Let's turn now to former Admiral Joe Sestak, former congressman from Pennsylvania. Admiral, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Ed. Thank you.
It's being reported and talked about that ISIS is using cryptic code that we are having a hard time catching up with. Are they that sophisticated? What do you know?
Well, I think that's a fact that's pretty amazing, quite frankly. You can purchase extraordinarily complex codes, and we know that here in America, that our NSA has a hard time cracking. But over time, we can crack these things. So the key here, Ed, is how did they purchase these? And again, I go back to the point made earlier, that part of this strategy against them has to be closing down the lifeline that makes them be able to exist, and that's the flow of their approximately $400 million that they have, that they could go out and purchase things, follow the money, much like we did with the mafia years ago. We have to cut down the flow of their money so they can't purchase arms and means of encryption and things like that.
Where do the Saudis come in all of this? And I think the world supply of oil has a big play in this as well, and I could be wrong, but it's the old business adage. When you want to put the other guy out of business, what you do is you go into town and you give it away, and watch your competition fall by the wayside, and then you own the market. I mean, it seems to me that the Saudis, with their $1 trillion reserve of oil, has had enough of the United States throwing oil on the international market. They want to stay in business. Their extraction costs are this. Their profit margins are here, and they're going to work towards that no matter what the geopolitical climate is. Your thoughts on that?
Look, the problem with Saudi Arabia is a number of the financiers of the Sunnis that are within ISIL and elsewhere have come from their own business types, and that's what they really have to close down on. We have seen this also in the United Arab Emirates, that the initial financing for this group came from homegrown business types, financiers in these countries. And what's happening today is that you have seen Jordan and then Egypt turn against ISIL, not just condemn it, but actually turn against them when their own citizens were burned in a cage or when they were beheaded on a beach. And Saudi Arabia has to recognize ISIL will turn against it eventually. Look, Ed, here's what I believe. I'll never forget when I commanded my carrier battle group for the retaliatory strikes against Afghanistan. It was a global coalition. Of those 30 ships I commanded, only 10 of them were United States ships. We had the Japanese there, believe it or not. We had the New Zealanders. We had the Italians. We had the Greeks having ships out there. This is truly still at a global effort. And building a coalition and having the United States take control of the situation in terms of bringing people together from Denmark to France, this is what's needed most now. Our leadership and hounding Saudi Arabia into this has to be done.
Well, the Egyptians now seem to be taking a real leadership role here in response to the beheading of the 21 Egyptian Christians on the shores of Libya. What do you make of this? They're calling for an international resolution from the United Nations and a coalition to take down ISIS. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Steve Clemens. Is this the president's strategy playing out in the next level?
I can't say it's that purposeful, but I do know this. Egypt has, with the UAE, struck into Libya before. But now that its own citizens were struck, it is moving even more strongly towards it. But, Ed, the instability in Libya and the creation of a base for Islamic terrorists in the east of Libya is exactly what we did not want to happen when we initially intervened.
Sure.
And now we have that situation. Look, it gets back to where you see the Italians saying they may send 5,000 troops into Libya. We can't go against this metastasizing threat in an ad hoc way. We have to have, if the president is a strategy, and it should be, asserting the leadership and making it clear that the global in the war of terror has not ended. Look, these threats on the beaches of Libya could soon be here. And to think that the Senate is going to close down the Department of Homeland Security at such a time, this asserts leadership here domestically by the president and around the world.
So we need to keep all options on the table. I mean, we're sitting here, and I'll go through the region here, as ISIS continues to grow in geography and influence. and we know how sophisticated their social media and their networking and their cryptic operation is in coding. We're still waiting for the Turks, who haven't done a whole hell of a lot.
Right.
They have the capability, but haven't done much. You've got the Jordanians in response to their pilot being burned. You've got the Iraqis. You've got the Egyptians, and now Libya understanding exactly what has to be done on their soil. There's a lot of things that have to fall into place for the Obama strategy here to work. And short of us putting a troop or a body, a man or a resource on the ground to fight ISIS in a different neighborhood. This is really a unique international balancing act, isn't it?
Without a question. And we, Ed, as I have said with you a number of times, even 3 years ago, I think have been slow to provide arms, not troops, but arms to moderate rebels in Syria. A year ago, ISIL was 60 miles from Baghdad, and we still had not reacted. My take is this is a tough balancing act, and the only one that can bring it together is the United States, the President of the United States. Look, we have to decapitate, like we did to al-Qaeda, the key leaderships throughout ISIL, and that isn't going to end the living system that it has become. But that's the beginning, and only us, with our intelligence and surgical strikes, not troops on the ground unless it's a surgical use of our special forces, but gaining the intelligence and having the hard work on the ground done by the Arabs in Syria and Iraq, or having the hard work on the ground done by the Italians, if they even have special enough troops to do it in Libya. That's the kind of coalition we must use. This does not take another invasion of a country. There's been too much of that because we broke Iraq, and that's where ISIL came from. So this takes leadership and smart use of smart power by the United States.
This is former Defense Secretary Leo Panetta. I think you guys are on the same page on this when it comes to Washington being in the way of what we need to do.
You want to know what the biggest national security threat is to this country right now? It's the total dysfunction in Washington. The fact that so little can be done by the Congress. They can't even resolve the issue of Homeland Security. They can't deal with budgets. They can't deal with immigration reform. They can't deal with infrastructure. They can't deal with other issues. If they wind up not being able to deal with this war authorization, that sends a terrible message to the world.
Joe, what do you think?
He's spot on. All you hear down there in that Senate is what shouldn't be done, what they won't let happen, rather than what should be done. The ability to reach out and begin to come together is absolutely why the trust deficit is the biggest deficit in America today. Around the world, they look at us and saying, you really think they're going to be able to step into a leadership role when they can't even deal with matters at home? That Congress is broken, Ed.
May I use a historical parallel here about what President Obama is doing to gain allies? It's almost like he's waiting for ISIS to metastasize where it affects so many people that putting this together won't be as heavy a lift as you might think, convincing those to commit. And I want to say FDR.
Right.
Hitler was on the move, and people in America thought the ocean was a good enough separation, and it really wasn't our fight. We didn't have to do that. And it took time. They were bombing Britain for a year before we got into it. I do see a parallel here. I see President Obama understanding that there's going to be a lot of strife before everybody gets there, but this is the best way in the long run to take ISIS down. Now, if I'm off base, tell me.
I think the analogy is accurate except for one factor, Ed, time. Mm-hmm. Back then you had an ocean. Mm-hmm. Where they could not, it would take them weeks to cross. Today, it's some ISIL guy that happens to hide on a plane and gets over here. That's why I brought up the Department of Homeland Security. Why
Sure.
Even John McCain today said, what the heck are we doing shutting down the DHS in my Republican Party when we know that they're trying to get here? And so my take is the president does not have time. And in the ensuing unease with which people watch their own citizens in Denmark and France, and hopefully we will be able to prevent them here. But the thing is, I don't think we have that time that FDR does. That's the different factor.
Admiral Joe Sestak, always a pleasure to visit. I appreciate your time, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Always.